The simulation hypothesis is a rather simple claim. It proposes that we're living in a computer-generated simulation. The Matrix movie creates a good image, the one like in the Matrix. If you were to simulate the brain, then there would be no reason to have bodies in the real world. The simulated people would be some sort of code in a program. If you take the hypothesis seriously, then there are plenty of problems with it. First and foremost, it's not a scientific hypothesis, since those have to be falsifiable. There are no conditions under which you could say that the simulation hypothesis is downright false. If you go through the internet, then there are plenty of people that don't believe that they live in a simulation. But no matter the argument they bring forth, the proponents of the hypothesis can always say it's just a part of the simulation.
Then it seems very reasonable that we're just dealing with incremental increases in technology that's pretty stunning and pretty profound currently, but that we haven't experienced a simulation yet. Isn't that
Well, that's how it
also?
looks, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but that's also how it would look if you were in a simulation.
At this point, most people lose interest in the idea. It's kinda annoying to argue with a guy who can at any time expand his concept to incorporate everything. Most, but not all. Nick Bostrom found a way to narrow the discussion. He tried to constrain the hypothesis to fewer coherent possibilities. He came up with the simulation argument. It consists of 3 arguments which I'll modify for the sake of simplicity. First, is it possible to create simulated worlds at all? The second, is there the will to make them? And the third, if the answer to the first 2 is yes, then you're living in a simulated world. Rogan had difficulties in seeing why it's highly likely that we're living in a simulation, given positive answers to the first 2 questions. The reason is simple. Simulations will breed more simulations. If it's possible to make simulations at base reality and one is made, then you know that it has to be possible to make simulations and that there's will to make them in the simulated worlds as well, since those are derivatives of the base reality. Then you can safely assume that the simulated worlds will create simulated worlds of their own, and on it will go. It's a nuclear chain reaction. The more simulations you get, the more simulations will be created. Then, if you at some point counted the base realities and the simulated ones, you would get one base reality and billions of simulated ones. Presumably, simulated realities are so good that they are indistinguishable from the real reality. So there's no way to know in which one you are by observation of the external world. Your only way to make a decision is to look at the numbers of the worlds that exist. And the question is, do you think that you're 1 in a billion who lives in the base reality, or not? Anyways, that's at least how the argument goes. I think that in itself it's fairly sound, though I have a problem with the whole argument on a different level. I will illustrate it with my own argument, which I call the 2 plus 2 argument. It goes like this. If 2 plus 2 is not larger than 4, and if 2 plus 2 is not smaller than 4, then the probability that 2 plus 2 is 4 is 100%. The 2 plus 2 argument in itself is true. The problem with it is that it's an overly complicated way of showing that 2 plus 2 is 4, and that's the problem I have with the simulation argument. It adds additional complexity without giving much in return. I don't see a point in going beyond the first question. Is it even possible to simulate reality to such a degree that it becomes reality of its own? From a technical point of view, things look bleak. The problem is that we don't understand how the human mind works. We don't know how consciousness comes about. We don't know how the unconscious works. We just don't have an accurate abstracted idea of how our mind works. Therefore, the only hope in simulating the mind would be to simulate the brain. I mean every atom in it and every interaction of every atom. That's a lot of atoms. Around 10 to the power of 27 atoms. There's a reason nobody is calculating movement of objects such as trajectory of rockets on the scale of an atom. There are just too many atoms. To simulate the brain atom by atom, you have to assume an infinite computing power. And that's what people do. People like to look at the trend of increasing computing power and they assume that the exponential growth will continue forever. I find it more likely that computers will follow the pattern of all other technologies and will hit a brick wall, after which investment in improvements of the technology will produce only marginal results. We know that the simulation hypothesis isn't a scientific problem, since it's formulated in a non-scientific way. It's not really a technical problem either, since everyone is stuck in the contemplation phase. There's a good element of philosophy if you focus on how can we be sure that what we experience is real part. But it's really a psychological problem. People since time immemorial have been projecting their own fantasies onto the unknown. The potential of technology is the epitome of the unknown. You can project anything you like and then find a possible reason to justify your fantasy. It's a similar story with pretty much every fundamentally new technology. When electricity was discovered, people connected themselves in circuits for the healing benefits. When magnetism was discovered, some people were using magnets to move the magnetic fluid in your body to heal all sorts of ailments. When nuclear technology was invented, people had all sorts of fantasies where the nuclear energy transforms you into a superhero. Hulk, Spider-Man, the blue guy from Watchmen. All of them got their powers from being exposed to nuclear radiation. The point is that the potential of new technologies has always been a doorway for our fantasies to run wild. And the fantasy of a simulated world leans more to the Hulk level of fantasy. Worrying about simulation hypothesis is the same as worrying about freezing to death, because unicorns might fart out too many rainbows and block the sun by doing so. As a rule of thumb, if I see multiple insurmountable problems so great that there aren't even any serious theoretical solutions, then the possibility of creating that technology and the consequences of it aren't worth thinking of. Simulation hypothesis is our all too human inability to distinguish reality from our own imagination. So stop dreaming you're not living in a simulation.